Hey everyone, Jay here. Just want to make sure you know that I have a new group starting for my teacher training on October 21st. If you are already a teacher and you're looking for some new inspiration or to expand your teaching, or maybe you're not a teacher, but you practice some and you're interested in a deeper inquiry, and you've probably considered doing teacher trainings in the past but didn't do them for one reason or another, well, you might check out the program I put together. It's designed to adapt to your individual needs and be flexible enough that it feels like a support rather than a burden. If that sounds like something that might be of interest to you, then again, there is a new group starting on October 21st. I encourage you to get in on it. You can find out more and register at jbrownyoga.com/training. All right, buttons have been pressed, and here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. If this is your first time here, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How are you doing? I hope that in choosing to listen today, you are also setting aside all the other stuff that might be occupying our senses, all the bad news that is predominant, because it's too much. It's too much to take in sometimes. And there's not really anything to do with it, you know? And for the sake of my own mental well-being and sense of self, I have to set it aside. I think that's what yoga practice is a lot about for me. It's about some facility with yourself where you get to have a little bit of say about where your mind is going some of the time. Enough so that you can choose to set it aside from time to time and notice all the beauty and awe and wonder of being alive. Otherwise, it just can be completely overshadowed by all the horrible tragedy and suffering. So, I hope that in listening to this, we might set it aside for a time. And honestly enough, I kind of have some cool stuff to share about the first week of the Yoga Center. Those of you who have been around know this, that I opened the Yoga Center and I had my first week of official classes. In the first 5 days, I had 10 classes on the schedule. 8 out of those 10 classes were attended. Pretty good, better than I would have expected, to be honest. Now, here's the other really amazing part about those 8 classes that were attended this week. People who know me or have studied with me may have heard me share that a lot of what I do as a yoga teacher is dedicated to my mother, who died when I was 16. And some while back, I decided that I wanted to have a class that my mom could come to were she alive. And that has guided a lot of my choices, and why I made Gentle as the New Advance, and all of that was I wanted to have a class that my mom could come to. And this week I had 8 classes attended, and 4 of those classes were one-to-one. Just one person came. And all 4 of those one-to-one classes were with a woman who was essentially the same age that my mom would be if she were alive. So it felt like I was practicing with my mom all week long. And it kept hitting me. And I just was like, so beautiful. And one of those women came 3 times. She didn't just have those one-to-one. She came to some other classes. And at the end of the week, she emailed me and told me how much she was appreciating the classes in the center. And it was really deeply, deeply meaningful for me. And it just was so mind-blowing. There's like a bunch of other observations that I had about teaching yoga this week. Maybe I'll share some of them on the other side of today's talk, but it was pretty amazing to be at the center, to have a place to go. In fact, some of the people who came said some of the best stuff to me. One woman said, yeah, I really wanted to go to a yoga class, and I looked at all the centers, and I just didn't want to buy a whole package, And then I saw that yours was just $15 a class like it used to be. I was just so happy about that. I was like, victory. I was so happy about that. That was the sell to her, that it was simple and they just could find what they needed to find on the website, and I wasn't trying to sell them a package. And then I would say the majority of the people who came were retired folk who have all kinds of ailments. And so the fact that I have a therapeutic orientation and that the classes were accessible was making them super happy. And they really seem like the people who are going to come on a regular. So it was pretty amazing that the people who came weren't people I knew already, who were on my email list. They were just random people who saw the article in the local paper or happened to hear from somebody that this place was opening and showed up. Now, having said that, I must also say the last 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, nobody showed to those classes. And I kind of knew that was going to be the case. I noticed that the other centers around here have very limited schedules on the weekends. And I think that's because people around here don't go to classes as much on the weekend, which is weird. In Brooklyn, weekend classes were always very well attended. But I guess around here, people tend to go to their yoga classes during the week. And that's what I'm sort of finding out right now. I'm just trying to see which times people seem to gravitate to most. And again, I'm just super grateful that somebody showed up. People showed up. And a bunch of those people were, I think, filling me with the spirit of my mom, which is so much a part of what I do as a yoga teacher. And it just felt like returning back to some very deep roots for me. And I was saying that last week about things coming around again. And that continued to happen. One of the other things that happened this week, my wife came to my class again. My wife had been in my yoga class for 15 plus years, since we had kids. And it was on a Thursday morning, and we went out to have brunch afterwards, which is what we used to do 20 years ago when we were dating. She would come to my class and we would go to have brunch afterwards. And we did that again 20 years later this week. So it's been pretty incredible for me to have this feeling of really beautiful patterns from my past coming around again in this new context. And at the same time, that's happening with a backdrop of horror and destruction and all kinds of, again, suffering. So it's such a bizarre mix, but setting aside all that backdrop and just paying attention to what was actually before me, which were people who were coming and all that entails. I'll say more on the other side, but it was really very reaffirming for me about the importance and the value of being a yoga teacher right now, which is very much on topic for my discussion today with Brian Dana Akers. And I sort of mentioned this a little bit to Brian at the beginning, but maybe I say a little more to you all here as I introduce you to today's talk, that Brian finds his way to this show in an unusual way, because he was so intriguing in terms of how he reached out. I say something about it, so I don't want to give it away, but ultimately he sent me his book, the Yoga Manifesto. And it's this little book, and it's orange. And when I first looked at it, I kind of wrote it off because it just seemed, it's small and it's like really simple and terse. And I was like, oh, this, like on a first impression, it didn't seem to me like it could have a lot of deep substantive stuff to it because of the way it was like presented. But I sort of stuck with it. And at some point, all these little gems came popping out. And in a way, it actually did capture like a lot of the stuff that I try to talk about on this show in terms of what I've observed happen with the yoga world and the industry and the yoga teachers becoming professionals and having careers, and even all the stuff that I talk about on the show about how hard it is to translate Sanskrit and where yoga fits in terms of like our culture and religion and science and materialist views, like all those threads that I talk about on this show were woven into this little book that he wrote in an incredibly like condensed sort of way. And I was like, wow, what the hell is this thing? So I reached out to him and he accepted the invitation, and you'll get to hear where it led. It was a pleasure to meet Brian, and I'm happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you're enjoying the show and you would like to connect with me in ways outside of just listening, there's lots of opportunities for that. I've got ongoing live classes and a weekly discussion group. I've also got an upcoming teacher training starting in just a few weeks if you want to dive in very deep. There's also other on-demand videos, or maybe you want to get into the full-length archives of the show and be a supporter with a podcast premium subscription. All of my stuff can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, y'all. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get into it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Brian Dana Akers. Are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello, Brian.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Is the volume at a good level?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can.
All right. Well, then I think we're good to go. And I think you've listened to the show before, so let's consider ourselves having begun, okay?
Okay.
Well, Brian, it's fun to get to have this moment with you. I have to say, I often talk about this, about the generation of the episodes and how there's a couple different ways that they happen. And I would say that the genesis of this conversation does feel unusual.
Oh.
I think primarily because most of the time when somebody reaches out to me, especially when they've published a book, they're usually trying to, I don't know, promote a book and get it out there, like their publisher or their literary agent has told them like a really good way to promote your book is to get on podcasts, And sometimes the emails come from like PR agents.
Oh.
And like these days, sometimes I can tell when they're like AI generated too, which is really bad.
Whoa.
But sometimes when I am intrigued by one of those emails, I will reach out and send an invitation. And almost always, I get sent a PDF copy of the book. But with you were like a little more dodgy. It was almost like you were trying me out more than I was trying you out. And I kind of like that. And then you sent me your book, the Yoga Manifesto. And it's a wonderful little orange book.
Right.
Which brought back something for me that I want to share just because it's like a deep formative memory, which is like in the early 90s, I was in like a used bookstore in Manhattan. And I pulled off a little orange book called The Orange Book by Sri Rajneesh, which many people might know later became known as Osho. And there was a notorious documentary about him on Netflix. But that little orange book was full of all these little wonderful meditations, some of which I still use to this day.
Mm-hmm.
So your little orange book, I was like, oh, look at this little orange book. And it's, and what I would say is it's very terse, but it's really full. Like it tells a pretty big story. And the story it tells is one that I'm often telling on this podcast. So that's my little introduction to say thanks for reaching out. And I'm glad to have this opportunity to speak with you.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad to be able to speak with you and to all your listeners.
Well, the other thing that's funny, Brian, is earlier today I was in my kitchen talking with my wife and she said, oh, who are you recording with today? And I said, a guy named Brian. He wrote this book called the Yoga Manifesto. And he said, yeah, what do you know about him? And I was like, I don't know that much about him. I just been like reading your bio page that you sent me. And I was like, he's from Kalamazoo. And she had the exact same reaction that I had. Like the word Kalamazoo, like from my childhood, like when someone said you're from Kalamazoo, it meant you're from nowhere.
Right.
I wasn't even really sure that was an actual place.
Yeah, like Timbuktu or something.
Exactly. So I said to my wife, he's from Kalamazoo. And she said, Kalamazoo? She's like, where is that? And I said to her, if you had to guess, where would you think Kalamazoo is? And she said, Nepal? And I was like, try Michigan. So that's pretty wild that you're from Kalamazoo, Michigan. I guess my question about that is, like when you were growing up in Kalamazoo, Michigan, you mentioned in your bio that your mom kind of brought home books on yoga and stuff, but there wasn't like yoga in Kalamazoo, Michigan when you were growing up, was there?
Well, there was. I was like in 8th grade, and my mom was kind of ahead of her time. She was into organic gardening and preventive health stuff. And she brought a book into this house called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. And I thought, well, what's the latest crazy thing mom is into? And I started reading it and I said, oh, this is kind of interesting. It had a few pictures, a few diagrams. I thought, well, let me try some of this. So I was just kind of trying on my own for a few months. And then my mom says, there's a woman in town who teaches that. Maybe you should take a class. And I said, well, okay. So she taught at the YWCA, and I went down there for an evening class. I was like 12 or 13. And it was me and about 45 middle-aged women in leotards trying to fight off the ravages of time. So it was quite different. So her name was Janet Bouillon, and she's an American woman, also from Michigan, but she was married to an Indian, a oncology research, a cancer researcher at Upjohn Pharmaceuticals. And so I took a whole class, and then I signed up again, and basically I took classes with her for the next 5 years, all the way through the end of high school.
And was it on your mom's side or your dad's side that you had this great-great-great-grandfather who was a well-known Christian educator?
That was on my dad's side. My great-great-great-grandfather is, he grew up, he was sort of a free thinker and a newspaper guy and not particularly religious, but he converted to Christianity, and then he became a Methodist circuit rider. And he co-founded a university and was president of another university and was a faculty on another university. And but the most interesting thing is, I don't know, it's a spoil the surprise in case anybody reads it. But the most interesting thing is he gave a fire and brimstone speech about the United States in like the 1830s, saying that this whole slavery system was going to come down in a crash of civil war. And who knows if the person involved in that is standing in this audience. And like 30 feet away was Abraham Lincoln. So it was quite a story. And, when we were growing up, we knew about this guy, Peter Akers, but he wasn't like a topic of conversation or a role model or anything. And there was just this vague understanding that, he was this sort of famous guy from the mid 19th century.
But your parents weren't religious?
No, actually, my father was a minister.
Okay.
He was a Methodist. He went to seminary in the 1950s and late 40s, early 50s. And then he founded he was the founding minister of a couple congregations, one in Wisconsin, where I was born, and then one in Minnesota. And then we moved to Kalamazoo, and he became very active in the Vietnam War movement, and then also the civil rights movement. So it made for a very lively house to grow up in, because there were always people coming over in big meetings and planning the next march, planning the next protest, planning to send people to Washington, D.C., putting up candidates for office, all that kind of stuff. So, he started out as just kind of a regular mainstream ecumenical Protestant minister. And then he got wrapped up in the times, the 60s, and especially civil rights and anti-war protests.
And he didn't have any issues with your mom bringing home these satanic yoga books?
No, he didn't. Maybe it was because he was just too busy to notice. He was very open-minded. He was very, very liberal, very interested in a lot of different things. And actually the funnier thing is that was his father who was interested in mysticism and things. So I don't know if you've seen those little Swami Vivekananda little books on karma yoga and Raja yoga.
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, little red leather things. Mm-hmm. I actually have those in my library, but they're from my father's father.
Oh, it just skipped a generation,
a generation a little bit.
Huh.
So, so it was quite an exciting place and time to grow up.
Yeah, I saw that also, that like Kalamazoo was the first place to have a pedestrian mall, because I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles in the 80s, and I grew up in malls.
Yeah.
Like, my whole childhood was going to the mall, to the arcade, or going to the mall to go ice skating or whatever. And you had the first mall in Kalamazoo, I read.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's even before that. When we lived in Minnesota, when I was really young, like up through kindergarten, we lived right near the very first closed-in mall. It's called Southdale, and it was designed by this guy named Victor Gruen. So that was the first enclosed mall in the United States. And then we moved, just by chance, we moved from Minnesota to Kalamazoo, and then Kalamazoo had the first outdoor pedestrian mall. And it was also designed by the same guy, Victor Gruen.
I point to it because it does feel like, I don't know, like a significant marker in like recent American history, like the generation before the internet.
Yeah.
We all had malls. My daughters, they have a mall, like we take them to once in a while, but it's not like the same as like when we were growing up and they were like hubs.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was like mall rat, small life,
That's right.
Going to the mall after school. It was quite a big thing.
It was. And okay, so I guess my next question is, you go to college and you decide to study Sanskrit. What makes you decide to do that?
Well, I went after 12th grade. I went to the east side of the state, to Ann Arbor, to the University of Michigan, and they had a foreign language requirement. And I just had, talking about how things have changed. We're in such an information-rich environment these days, where all the world's information is at your fingertips. Mm-hmm. All the world's disinformation too, but that's another problem. At that point, I just had this kind of vague idea that yoga and Sanskrit were connected. I wasn't really sure, but I thought they were. So I looked down the long list of languages you could take to fulfill your language requirement, and I saw Sanskrit. And I said, gosh, maybe I should try this. And so I did. I enrolled Sanskrit, and your what I was just freshman composition, and a history course and a science course and stuff like that. But I started taking Sanskrit my freshman year, and I never studied a foreign language before. And so that was my introduction. And
of all the languages to choose.
Yeah, oh yeah. Start with the hardest.
Yeah.
Start with the oldest. Start with the most difficult. So I did, and it was incredibly time consuming, but I did stick with it. And I ended up taking 3 years of Sanskrit in Ann Arbor. And then I spent my senior year in South India, where I studied a lot of Sanskrit. And then I came back to Ann Arbor and did 2 years of graduate school.
Okay, well, my question about that is, I've heard people talk about studying Sanskrit in like more academic ways, and then in other ways where it's more like a spiritual pursuit and a meditation. Mm-hmm. Was it very different studying Sanskrit in the States compared to studying in India?
It was quite different, but it wasn't academic versus spiritual. It was more like two different academic traditions. So in the United States, we, had a textbook and had classes and, went through and, learned this topic and that topic and that topic, just pretty much like any language class. In India, it was also at a university on the east coast of India, a city called Visakhapatnam, down in Andhra Pradesh. It was also in a university, but the guy was much more like a traditional pundit. And so instead of meeting like an hour a day, 3 times a week or something, we were there, me and one other student were there for like 4 hours a day, every day. And, he wanted to go ahead and teach Saturdays and Sundays too, but we had to say, no, we need a break, So it was very intense, like a very intense tutorial, and a tremendous amount of memorization. In fact, we memorized like everything. So we'd memorize it and then study it, translate it.
Did you have to chant it?
Again. Pardon?
Did you have to chant?
Yeah, we did actually. We chanted like the previous day's sutras. And from a certain starting point up until, today's lesson. So he wanted to make sure we'd paid attention and could recite everything. So we'd start out every day really reciting the last week's sutras, and then we'd start that day's lessons.
And the chanting was considered an academic pursuit?
Yeah. That they're not really as divided, that cleanly separated in India.
Yeah.
So it was both spiritual and academic, but it was more, it wasn't, in a temple, it wasn't in an ashram, it was in a university, but then it was in a university in India. So you're taking it as a higher calling. It's more like you're in a seminary rather than just a university.
I guess I'm asking it because my curiosity is around like chanting and how chanting kind of dovetails into prayer in certain ways. In your mind when you were there, did you ever think of it in like terms of like, this is a spiritual practice and I'm praying, or was just studying Sanskrit, learning your required language?
Yeah, I felt like I didn't really feel like it was a prayer per se, but I felt like I was remembering something sacred. So I guess you could say I was engaging with something sacred intellectually.
I get that. Something that's ancient and sacred. I think that's why I became interested in yoga as well. I wanted to have something like that in my life. Yeah. All right. Well, I also read that after your freshman year, you took a yoga teacher training course at the Shivananda ashram under the tutelage of Swami Vishnudevananda himself. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah. That was one of my summer vacations. That was the summer of 1976, which shows you how old I am. It was up in Valmarin, Canada, at their biggest ashram, their biggest center. It lasted 6 weeks. It was quite something. There was a large class of maybe 50 people, 50 or 60. It was quite a large class. And we start each day at, I think it was 6 a.m. We'd have meditation, and then there would be chanting. And then Swamiji would give a talk. And then we'd break for the first meal of the day, I think around 10. And then there would be more talks and demonstrations and stuff in the day, a little downtime, a little relaxation time. Then another training class in the afternoon, and another meal, the evening meal, and then more lecturing after the meal, and or more meditation too. So it was quite a full schedule. It went on for 6 weeks, and sometimes there was a big meditation hall we had classes in, and there was also a beautiful grove of trees. So if the weather was good, Swamiji would sit kind of at the edge of the trees, and then we were all, sitting underneath the trees and taking notes and so on. So it was quite something.
Did you get to have much direct interaction with him?
Not like one-on-one, but oftentimes I would sit pretty close. So I was sitting like 10 feet away. And, he was just lecturing for hours every single day. So, you're just kind of absorbing his energy and his personality all day long.
And it's interesting that you say that, his personality. What was your impression of him?
Incredibly high energy level. And in fact, the person that he most reminds me of is Steve Jobs.
Wow, Steve Jobs and Swami Vishnudevananda. That's quite a link, huh?
Yeah, because Swamiji came over basically penniless. He was sent by Shivananda saying, the students are there, they're waiting for you. And he ends up in Canada, and he gets this parcel of land, and it's just completely covered with trees. So, he logs the property himself, and then starts building the original buildings himself. And then he starts a center in Montreal, and he starts one in New York City, and then he starts another ashram. And, so he's like a founder. He has like that founder energy. Mm. And then I saw Steve Jobs once at a computer show in Chicago at McCormick Place. And he was just mobbed by people. He was at the Apple booth talking. But what struck me about Steve Jobs was just his energy level was just off the scale. And so those are two people, I think, they just built things from scratch, and they had a tremendous amount of energy.
And after that, like 6 weeks of teacher training, did you ever see him again after that?
Well, I went up to Valmarin, I went a couple times during high school. Janet Bouillon took me and a couple other students up. So we'd go for like a week, because they also had they called them campers. I think he called it a yoga camp. So people would just go there for their vacations instead of some, usual thing. They would go there and they just spend a week meditating and practicing yoga and so on. So I'd gone a couple times in high school, and then I went to this teacher training course. And then I think I went back again like the following year, just as an ordinary, camper. And then college kind of drew me off, and I didn't see Swamiji again after that, I believe. I did go to one of his ashrams, though, in South India, the year I was in college, or the year I was in India. So that would have been 79. I went to ashram in Kerala, Nayar Dam district. And it was just kind of getting started, getting underway. And so there weren't very many people there. There was one Swami there, an Australian guy, and there was just a couple Indians there, and they were just trying to like get a vehicle and get things set up. So
I guess my curiosity here is that a lot of people, when they talk about direct experience or being in the presence of someone like Swami Vishnudevananda, they often talk about them as though they are God men and they considered them gurus. And Swamiji is often considered like a term of endearment for your guru. Mm-hmm. Did you think of him in those terms at all?
I thought, this is a little complicated because things have come out since then.
I know, that's where I'm going, Brian.
Okay.
Because people who had a direct experience of these people, mm-hmm. Like years later, all this stuff comes out about them. Mm-hmm. And then it's almost like, well, did you, at the time, was there ever any indications? Because oftentimes there were.
I would say no, there wasn't. I was there in the mid-'70s. And I think all the unpleasant events, I don't know what you're going to describe, happened like in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, as things grew and got bigger and scaled and stuff.
Yeah. And so, it's funny also because, being a PK or a preacher's kid or, the son of a minister, and from a line of ministers, I also had an uncle that was a minister. And then I also had a couple of great uncles and plus that great grandfather. Mm-hmm. So, for me, I have sort of seen the religious life or the spiritual life from the inside already, because people see, I was with my father when he'd come home on a Sunday afternoon and we'd all have, a Sunday lunch. So I'd kind of seen religious people both in their public facing persona, but then also at home. And with the Vietnam War protests, we'd have a lot of clergy members over all the time because they were trying to organize like all the different churches and synagogues and everything to try to, get the movement going. So my opinion of Swamiji was that I didn't see anything inappropriate, and it wouldn't have occurred to me that he was doing anything inappropriate. But I also didn't feel like he was a completely saintly, removed from earthly things. I thought he was just an incredibly energetic and insightful and motivational speaker and presence and force of nature. So that's kind of how I would describe him.
I see. And I read that you did continue your studies in graduate school and you continued studying in India, Indian history and Urdu, right?
Yeah, well, Hindi and Urdu are really the same language,
right?
The same spoken language. And the difference is that Hindi tends to get its source vocabulary from Sanskrit and it's written in Devanagari. And then Urdu tends to draw its source vocabulary from Persian or Arabic. And then it's written in that Persian script, kind of backwards writing. So you start on the right and your hand moves leftward across the page.
And all of this like yoga teacher training and Sanskrit studies, were you at all thinking about that as like a career path for yourself? Or is that just soul searching on your part?
It was kind of both. It was a lot of soul searching, especially after the death of my father. My father died when I was in 10th grade, and it was just a catastrophic blow to the entire family. And so there was some soul searching, and then also I was just kind of intellectually interested in it. And I really was just trying to learn everything and trying to figure things out. And I really wasn't thinking about careers or jobs or anything like that, which created a kind of a rough transition when I ended university, because I just spent like 6 years just...
That's what I say. You spent all this time doing stuff that you couldn't make any money at, or unless you become like a professor, I guess, right?
Yeah. So as you may know, there's been a surplus of PhDs for like half a century now. And so the graduate schools just keep putting out PhDs, even though there's really no jobs for them.
Yeah.
And so that has started to hit like in the 70s and 80s, and it's just continued with various intensities since then. So, so that's when after about 6 years of university, I said, man, I got to take a break. And so the unemployment rate in Michigan was like 17%. And, this was in 81. And some of the cities like Flint and Jackson, they had like 25%.
Yes, you referenced the Michael Moore movie, Roger and Me. I remember when that came out.
Yeah. It was just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I decided to move. I knew a couple who lived in California. So I went out and stayed with them for a week. And then I found a place to live. And then I bought a little computer and started reading the manual. And then I eventually got one job and then another job and then another job. And in California, in the Bay Area, people just change jobs all the time. It's not at all unusual for somebody to change jobs on a yearly basis. It's really quite something. Even like the really primo, really high prestige, really well-paying jobs like Apple Computer, the average tour of duty there is like 3 years. So people will work there for 3 years and then go someplace else.
They try their own startup or whatever, right?
Yes, their own startup, a different company, like that. So it's really normal. But I worked in a bunch of different companies, all related to, book publishing or advertising or graphic arts or printing.
Yes, I was reading about that in your stuff. That it's an interesting thing to me because all the technology was for publishing. It was pre-internet. Mm-hmm. And it was just when they started introducing computers to printing, right?
Right. Yeah, I was the guy who did that, in fact. One of the places I went to, they didn't have computers yet. So I was like the guy who, set up the network and started training people and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was a big transition.
But like many industries, when the internet hit, that kind of all went away to a degree, or a lot of it did, huh?
Yeah. So of the publishing industries, book publishing has survived the best because people still like printed books. So they've done okay. But like the newspaper industry has just been decimated. And magazines have also taken an enormous hit. So since the beginning of the century, I was just reading in Publishers Weekly that the book publishing industry has lost about a third of its employees. But I wouldn't be surprised if magazines was 2/3 and newspapers was like 80 or 90%. Mm. Yeah. But on the other hand, you've got YouTube and Zoom and
other things,
Wikipedia and everything.
Yeah, sure. But that would require another transition. Like, did you see the writing on the wall for that gig at some point, or?
I was kind of, after about 10 years of that, I was just ready to quit. Mm. And then just a few months after that, I met my wife, Loretta, and just dropped everything and moved to New York with her and shacked up with her. We, I don't know if it's kind of, people are just kind of amazed that we did this, but I went on a solar eclipse cruise in 91. It was in July. I hadn't taken a vacation in a long time. So I said, I'm just going to go on this solar eclipse cruise. Because I'd been interested in astronomy.
Yes, that's a whole part of you too. Your astrophysics interest.
Yeah, so I flew down to L.A. and got on this 1-week cruise that went from L.A. down to Mexico and back. And then on board the ship, you'd watch a total solar eclipse. And so one day we were in Cabo San Lucas, and it was kind of sunset, and I was standing up on the deck of the ship, and there were a lot of people. And then I noticed this attractive woman there, and we struck up a conversation. And before you know it, we are in it deep. And and then she lived in New York, and I lived in California. So after a week, she went back to Woodstock, New York, which is where I am now. I went back to California, and we talked a lot on the phone, and I decided to just drop everything and come out and join her. And we got married 3 months to the day after we met. But we'd only spent actually like 3 days in each other's presence, like the last 3 days of that cruise. So,
if you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.